Joseph Stalin was the dictator of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, from 1929 to 1953. Under Stalin, the Soviet Union was transferred from a peasant society into an industrial and military superpower. However, he ruled by terror, and millions of his own citizens died during his brutal reign. Stalin's height was only 5 feet 4 inches tall. Born into poverty, Stalin became involved in revolutionary politics as well as criminal activities as a young man. After Bolshevik leader Vladimir Lenin died, Stalin outmaneuvered his rivals for control of the party. Once in power, he collectivized farming and had potential enemies executed or sent to forced labor camps. Stalin aligned with the United States and Britain in World War II, 1939 to 1945, but afterward engaged in an increasing tense relationship with the West known as the Cold War, 1946 to 1991. After his death, the Soviets initiated a de-Stalinization process. Joseph Stalin was born Joseph Vissarionovich Djuzishvili on December 18, 1878 or December 6, 1878 according to the old-style Julian calendar, although he later invented a new birth date for himself, December 21, 1879, in a small town of Gori, Georgia, then part of the Russian Empire. Stalin was not actually a native Russian. He was from Georgia, a region that had been claimed by Russia in 1801. When he was in his 30s, he got the name Stalin while he was a revolutionary. It comes from the Russian word for still combined with Lenin. Stalin had two older siblings who died young. He was the only child in his family to survive. Stalin grew up poor and an only child. His father was a shoemaker and alcoholic who beat his son, and his mother was a laundress. At the age of 7, Stalin contracted smallpox, which left him with lifelong facial scars. When he was 12, he was run over by a horse-drawn carriage, an accident that required surgery to fix his arm. Because of this, his one arm was shorter than the other, and he was also considered unsuitable for the military. Stalin was hit by a horse-drawn carriage twice as a child, which led to a permanent damage of his left arm. This injury exempted him from fighting in World War I. He was bullied by other children while also enduring beating at the hands of his father. Stalin's father, Bessarion or Besso, was an alcoholic who often beat his wife and young son. After his father's business failed, his father, Besso, left his wife and Stalin, visiting them only occasionally to continue the beating and drinking. As a teen, Stalin earned a scholarship to attend a seminary in the nearby city of Tbilisi and studied for the priesthood in the Georgian Orthodox Church. While there, he began secretly reading the work of German social philosopher and Communist Manifesto author Karl Marx, becoming interested in the revolutionary movement against the Russian monarchy. In 1899, Stalin was expelled from the seminary for missing exams, although he claimed it was for Marxist propaganda. Though Stalin was bullied as a child, he became the aggressor as he got older. After leaving school, Stalin became an underground political agitator, taking part in labor demonstrations and strikes. He adopted the name Kopa after a fictional Georgian outlaw hero and joined the more militant wing of the Marxist Social Democratic movement, the Bolshevik, led by Vladimir Lenin. He and his gang, the Outfits, helped to fund the Bolshevik by robbing trains, banks, and mail ships. In one such incident, 40 people were killed, 2 horse-drawn carriages were robbed, and $250,000 were stolen. Stalin would never answer to or be punished for these crimes. Stalin led riots and strikes and even raised money by robbing banks and other crimes. He was arrested multiple times between 1902 to 1913 and subjected to imprisonment and exile in Siberia. Soon, Stalin became one of Lenin's top leaders. In 1906, Stalin married Ekaterina Svandes, a seamstress. The couple had one son, Yakov, who died as a prisoner in Germany during World War II. His wife, Ekaterina, died from typhus when her son was only an infant. In 1910, Joseph Stalin changed his name to Stalin, which means man of steel. In 1912, Lenin, then in exile in Switzerland, appointed Joseph Stalin to serve on the first Central Committee of Bolshevik Party and urged him to write an article on the future of empire's minorities. Stalin was hailed as a hero when he helped Lenin to escape from Tsar army into Finland and is appointed to the inner circle of Bolshevik Party. In 1917, the Russian Revolution took place. This was when the government led by the Tsar was overthrown and Lenin and the Bolshevik came into power. Russia was now called the Soviet Union and Joseph Stalin was a major leader in the government. In November 1917, the Bolsheviks seized power in Russia. In 1918, Stalin married his second wife, Nazdezhda Nadia Aliyeva, the daughter of Russian revolutionary. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl. The Soviet Union was founded in 1922 with Lenin as its first leader. During these years, Stalin had continued to move up the party ladder, and in 1922 he became Secretary General of the Central Committee of the Communist Party, a role that enabled him to appoint his allies to the government jobs and grew a base of political support. In 1924, Vladimir Lenin died. After Lenin's death, a bitter power struggle broke out between Stalin and the more idealistic Trotsky. Both sides had their supporters. Lenin himself had said before he died that Trotsky should replace Stalin as a general secretary of the Communist Party. Before Lenin died, he wrote a testament where he recommended that Stalin be removed from power. But in the end, Stalin won out, exiling Trotsky to Kazakhstan in 1928 before deporting him from the Soviet Union. 11 years later, Stalin dealt Trotsky the ultimate blow and had him assassinated in Mexico City on 21st August 1940. Stalin had been General Secretary for the Communist Party since 1922. He had been growing in power and control. After Lenin's death, Stalin took over as the sole leader of the Soviet Union. In order to strengthen the Soviet Union, Stalin decided that the country should move away from agriculture and become industrialized. He had factories built throughout the country. These factories would help the Soviet Union to fight the Germans in World War II. Under his leadership, the production of coal, oil and steel grew exponentially and the country saw huge economic growth. But these gains came at a huge human cost. People were forced into leaving their homes to work in the factories where they labored in terrible conditions, and those who refused were killed. At least 5 million people are believed to have died during this industrialization process. Starting in the late 1920s, Joseph Stalin launched a series of 5-year plans intended to transfer the Soviet Union from a peasant society into an industrial superpower. His development plans was centered on government control of the economy and included the forced collectivization of Soviet agriculture in which the government took control of farms. Millions of farmers refused to cooperate with Stalin's order and were shot or exiled as punishment. The forced collectivization also led to widespread famine across the Soviet Union that killed millions. Stalin was one of the most brutal leaders in the world history. He had anyone that didn't agree with him killed. In the beginning of 1920, when farmers refused to agree with his will and were not ready to cooperate with Stalin, he announced shoot-on-sight order and exile in some cases as punishment. Throughout his rule, he would order purges where millions of people he thought were against him would be killed or put into slave labor camps. His second wife, Nadezhda, committed suicide in her early 30s in 1932. Stalin also fathered several children out of wedlock. After the death of his second wife, Stalin is said to have loved no one but his daughter, Svetlana. It's a common fact that Stalin was married twice, both times ending with the wife's premature deaths. The first from typhus and the second by suicide. But what is less known is that as a handsome and well-spoken young man, he had relationships with many other women, producing a great number of offspring. Stalin ruled by terror and with a totalitarian grip in order to eliminate anyone who might oppose him. He expanded the power of the secret police, encouraged citizens to spy on one another, and had millions of people killed or sent to Gulag system or forced labor camps. During the second half of the 1930s, Stalin instituted the Great Purge, a series of campaigns designed to rid the Communist Party, the military and the other parts of Soviet society from those he considered as a threat. Stalin designed and nurtured a famine throughout Ukraine between 1932 and 1933 that resulted in the death of approximately 7 million people. The Communist Party specially targeted Ukraine for its efforts in gaining independence from Soviet rule. Stalin enforced quotas on Ukrainian farms to agricultural products to the Soviet Union. These quotas continued to increase until there was not enough food to sustain Ukrainian population. When Ukrainian communists appealed to the Soviet administration, Stalin used military force to purge the Ukrainian Communist Party and subsequently sealed Ukraine's border to prevent the shipment of food into the country. Additionally, Soviet force confiscated all food sourced from private Ukrainian residents. Additionally, Stalin built a cult of personality around himself in the Soviet Union. Cities were renamed in his honor. Soviet history books were rewritten to give him a more prominent role in the revolution and mythologize other aspects of his life. He was the subject of flattering artwork, literature and music, and his name became part of Soviet national anthem. He censored photographs in an attempt to rewrite history, removing former associates executed during his many purges. His government also controlled the Soviet media. In 1939, at the start of World War II, Joseph Stalin and German dictator Adolf Hitler signed the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact. Stalin then proceeded to annex parts of Poland and Romania, as well as the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. He also launched an invasion of Finland. Then, in June 1941, Germany broke the Nazi-Soviet pact and invaded the USSR. Stalin had ignored warnings from the Americans and the British, as well as his own intelligence agents, about the potential invasion, and the Soviets were not prepared for the war. As the Soviet army were unprepared to face the attack, they had to face a huge loss. When the Germans captured Stalin's sons from his first marriage, Yakov, near Smolensk in 1941, they falsely believed they could make a Soviet leader obey their demands. They took Yakov to a concentration camp and offered his release for that of the captured Feldmarschall Frederick Paulus. Although nobody can be sure about what really was said, it is believed that Stalin refused their offer by stating that he won't exchange a soldier for a Feldmarschall. In 1943, Yakov died under mysterious circumstances in Skansenvenia concentration camp in the northeast Germany. Most historians believe he was murdered because his father refused to negotiate. As German troops approached the Soviet capital of Moscow, Stalin remained there and directed a defensive policy, destroying any supplies or infrastructure that might benefit the enemy. Soviet forces launched a counter-offensive against the Germans, a raid at Stalingrad in mid-November 1942. They quickly encircled an entire German army, more than 220,000 soldiers. In February 1943, after months of fierce fighting and heavy casualties, the surviving German forces, only about 91,000 soldiers, surrendered. The tide turned for the Soviets with the Battle of Stalingrad from August 1942 to February 1943, during which the Red Army defeated the Germans and eventually drove them out of Russia. Stalin plays a decisive role in Germany's defeat, and great swaths of Eastern Europe are now occupied by Soviet force, including East Berlin. Stalin was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 1945 and 1948 for his war efforts, although he was never awarded one. For the same reasons, he was chosen as Times Magazine's Person of the Year in 1939 and 1942. After World War II, Stalin set up a puppet government in the Eastern European countries that the Soviet Union had freed from Germany. These governments were run by the Soviet Union. He established communist government throughout Eastern Europe. His former allies, America and Britain, now became his rivals, and Prime Minister of United Kingdom, Winston Churchill, states that an iron curtain is falling over Europe. In a struggle for control of the capital, Stalin blocks an entry to Allied occupied West Berlin. The US responds with an 11-month-long airlift of supplies to people trapped in the part of the city. On 29 August 1949, the Soviet Union tested its first atomic bomb. This started the Cold War between the two world superpowers, the Soviet Union and the United States. In 1950, Stalin gave North Korea's communist leader Kim Il-sung permission to invade South Korea, supported by United States, an event that triggered the Korean War. Stalin had some extremely unusual sleeping habits. He reportedly was a night owl, going to sleep at 4 in the morning, waking up only at midday, and having his most productive hours late into the evening. When he had gone in for a regular checkup in 1951, his doctor told him to rest more and work less, words that Stalin did not take well. The doctors were arrested and charged with working as a spy for British intelligence. In Stalin's last year, he becomes increasingly suspicious and continues to conduct purges against his enemies within the party. Stalin had suffered a series of minor strokes before 1953 and was generally in declining health. On the night of February 28, he watched a film at the Kremlin, then returned to his residence where he met with several prominent subordinates including Beria, head of NKVD Secret Police, and Nikita Khrushchev, who would eventually succeed Stalin. They left at 4 a.m. with no suggestion that Stalin was in poor health. Stalin then went to bed, but only after saying the guards could go off duty and that they were not allowed to wake him up. Stalin would usually alert his guards before 11 a.m. and ask for tea, but no communication came. The guards grew worried, but were forbidden from waking Stalin and could only wait. There was no one in the residence who could counter Stalin's order. A light came on in the room around 6:30 p.m., but still no call. The guards were terrified of upsetting Stalin for fear they too would be sent to the gulags and possible death. Eventually, plucking up the courage to go in and using the arrived post as an excuse, a guard entered the room at 10 p.m. and found Stalin lying on the floor in a pool of urine. Stalin was helpless and unable to speak, and his broken watch showed he had fallen at 6:30 p.m. The guards felt they did not have the right authority to call for a doctor. Indeed, many of Stalin's doctors were the target of a new purge, so instead they called the Ministry of State Security. The guards also felt they did not have the right power and called Lavrentiy Beria, a Soviet politician. Exactly what happened next is still not fully understood, but Beria and other leading Russians delayed acting, possibly because they wanted Stalin to die and not include them in the forthcoming purge, possibly because they were scared of seeing to influence on Stalin's power should he recover. They only called for doctors sometime between 7 and 10 a.m. next day. The doctors, when they finally arrived, found Stalin partially paralyzed, breathing with difficulty and vomiting blood. They feared the worst, but were unsure. The best doctors in Russia, those which had been treating Stalin, had recently been arrested as a part of the forthcoming purge and were in prison. Representatives of the doctors who were free and had seen Stalin went to the prison to ask for the old doctor's opinion, who confirmed the initial negative diagnosis. Stalin struggled on for several days, eventually dying at 9:50 on March 5, 1953, at the age of 73. Under Stalin, the Soviet Union saw the death of well over 20 million people due to the policies of political and economic repression. Thank you.